Well, I think that statement is hyperbolic. Personally, I guess I have more faith in our constitutional order and our institutions. I have more faith in our constitutional order and our institutions than perhaps Representative Cheney, who I respect greatly, is espousing right now. You know, needing to make it a choice between people remembering what the Trump presidency was like and now what the Biden presidency is like. More people said his policies have hurt. That's the problem for Biden here. He's not running against something abstract on the economy. He's running against a recent memory. And the recent memory of Trump is the economy was pretty good. I actually don't think there's a lot new here. And I really think the Democrats who are screaming about him being the next Hitler really ought to take a good hard look at what's going on in their own base right now, because there's a whole bunch of anti-Semitism on the left-wing progressive flank, and Joe Biden is competing for their votes. And if they're worried about Adolf Hitler, maybe they ought to talk to some of their own supporters about the anti-Semitism that's running rampant on our college campuses and across cities all over this country. And although Donald Trump, I don't think often models Christian behavior, I don't think they're hiring him to sing in the choir. They're hiring him to guard the doors of the church, is how they would probably describe it. And they've been told this, of course, by Donald Trump. And they have also been living with this feeling that every time Donald Trump is accused of something, they come around to believing that it's ultimately going to be debunked or has been debunked. And so this has been added to that list. Mm-hmm. And that's also why he's been insulated, I think, to some degree from all of the criminal charges that he's facing in the different trials. There is a belief among his biggest supporters and a lot of Republicans that ultimately, Trump is vindicated because we find out it was all a hoax to begin with. That same rubric is being applied here to January the 6th.
And again,
and to Van's point, I think he's going to pitch himself as the peace and prosperity guy. We talked about this a little earlier, and
I think in the media ecosystem,
that is a more moderate policymaker to say, well, I would rather not.
In the media ecosystem, in which
I think there will be voters who say we're only at war because when we had a strong president, people knew better, and now we have a weak president, and things get out of hand. All I can tell you is that I read the same polls you do, and 70 or 80% of Americans don't think Joe Biden has the mental acuity to be president today, let alone for 4 more years. But the Republican Party wants to rerun this thing because they believe they are on the cusp of euphoric vindication. They may be wrong, but that's what we're seeing among the actual party members. But it does mean perhaps people believe that we didn't have to have the inflation we had, and it didn't have to take as long for things to start coming back. I think that's where Biden has trouble here, is he wants everyone to give him the credit anytime anything happens, while forgetting the last 3.5 years when people were pretty darn mad at him, specifically over inflation. And it's not like, their memories can be wiped out. This is not the next sequel to Men in Black. We don't have the little flashy things here. People are going to remember that. Big number that continues to jump out at me, poll after poll. And in this one, Joe Biden, only 23% of Americans think he has the mental fitness to be president. So whatever messaging, ad strategies, speeches, whatever you can come with to solve, maybe soften your numbers on the economy or immigration or any other policy issue, how do you solve it when people have concluded that you are not fit to be the president of the United States today, let alone 4 more years? I think, to me, that is the glowing red light on the dashboard for the Biden campaign right now. And it's become a major crisis under a Democratic administration that for 3 years has claimed the border is secure, and now all of a sudden has realized, oh, the election's coming, so now the border's not secure. We want to blame somebody else. What has he been doing for the last 3 years? This became urgent to him only when it became obvious boat anchor on his re-election campaign. It didn't matter to him when he promised to give free health care to illegal immigrants during his campaign. It didn't matter to him on day one when he reversed all of Donald Trump's policies. It would have been better off for Joe Biden to have been indicted today than what this report turned out.
You're saying politically?
Yes. The number one thing, the number one anvil on the head of this campaign is the American people do not believe he has the mental acuity to serve as president today or for 4 more years. An independent third party comes along and says, he can't remember when he was vice president. He can't remember when his own son passed away. And I can't take this man in front of a jury because he'd be too sympathetic, because he's too old and forgetful. And the jury would find that to be sympathetic. This was politically devastating. An indictment would have been far better. Donald Trump is one of the most resilient politicians of the modern era. I mean, to think about all the things that have happened to him, to lose, to be indicted, to have everything that's happened, and for him to come back in such dominant fashion. It is just a level of resilience that you don't really see with normal politicians. I do agree with you. I think the general election is upon us. And although I think it's fun to analyze endlessly Donald Trump, to me, the big question is if you're like Joe Biden or his supporters and you're looking at everything that's happened, they must be asking themselves, how could we be losing to this guy right now because of what you just said? And with this polling that Harry just laid out, it is quite a dramatic thing to know that Trump never led Biden. Now he leads him in almost all the polling and the swing state polling that's come out. When there is, to a point you made earlier, some nostalgia for when Trump was in. I didn't feel like I was treading water. I felt like I was getting ahead. There didn't feel like chaos in the world. And until the pandemic came along, things seemed pretty good. If you look at the weekend polling that came out, if you look at some of the exit polling we did on the Super Tuesday states, these people were not really Trump voters to begin with in 2020. A lot of them didn't vote Republican ever. I mean, she attracted some Democrats. She attracted some independents who behave like Democrats. She became an avatar for the people who dislike Trump the most. So the idea that Donald Trump is going to go out on some reconciliation tour and convince all the never-Trumpers that were in her campaign, that's not going to happen. And so I was going to say, the news interesting about the comedy about Biden, though, and the age stuff, it's almost exclusively about his physical limitations. There really is no comedy about his mental capacity. It is about the stairs and the bicycle. I mean, I think this is, it's smart for the Biden people to coordinate this, to make it more about his physical limitations and not, because if you look at all the polling,
they got together.
If you look at all the polling, everyone's worried. They're not worried about Joe Biden stumbling. They're worried about whether he has the mental capacity at his age to serve another term.
They're worried about Trump.
And if you could, but are they?
Yes.
There's not a single poll in America taken during this campaign that shows people worried more about Trump's capacity than Biden.
I didn't say more.
So, but my point is this: it's a wise strategy to try to keep it focused on physical limitations and move the conversation away from does this person have the mental capacity? And that's what they got out of it tonight. And there's not really other events that go on in our political atmosphere that are designed to massage the rough edges of Trump. This is designed to massage the very rough edge of Biden, which is concerns about his age. Trump doesn't have an analogous thing.
Yeah, you're right.
The High Wire Act. I mean, look, Biden, they have got to change the narrative and the trajectory of this campaign. He's been president for 13 quarters. There's never been a president in the history of modern polling at this point below 40%. He's sitting in the 38% range. They have to change the narrative on, is he capable of a second term? They got to change the narrative on the economy. They got to change the narrative of the framing that Trump has successfully put on this campaign. I'm strong, he's weak, and it infects everything. The debate is a Hail Mary to try to get that done, because if that hardens, if that is cemented for too much longer, he'll never dig out of this hole. First of all, I find it incredible that Bakari thinks there's no persuasion to be had in this election. I mean, this just goes to show you what Democrat party politics means for black voters. They will take your vote for granted. They're not here to persuade you. They're not here to give you ideas. They're here to tell you to shut up and show up. That's the strategy of the Democratic Party. But that's why the polls show African-American voters, and specifically African-American men, are sick of it, and they're gravitating towards Donald Trump. Look, black voters are largely working class. They have the same problems that all working class Americans have. Well, let me just put a finer point on it. The Robert De Niro stunt blew up in Joe Biden's face. It was a complete disaster. It was a complete fiasco. But I think it's born out of something that's true about the Biden campaign. They are stuck in the mud or stuck in quicksand or however you want it, and they are scrambling for something to get them out of it. And the month of June, or here at the end of May into June, really may be their last best chance. They've got a verdict coming in this case, and they've got a debate at the end of the month. If these two things happen, let's just say Donald Trump is convicted and the debate goes however it goes. If on July the 1st, Joe Biden is still at 38 or 39%, and he's still losing in the swing states, and he's still losing or, roughly tied with Trump nationally, if you think there's a panic going on in the Democratic Party today, give it a month, and then the real panic will set in. But I think the stunt and engaging in the trial is just part of this attempt to try to shake the ball and try to shake this campaign loose. It's stable and it's stagnant for the Democrats right now. Look, if you're worried about incoherence, I mean, look, Joe Biden has claimed his uncle was eaten by cannibals. He has claimed he was arrested with Nelson Mandela. He has claimed all kinds of crazy things that make no sense whatsoever. And so I hear people unspooling this about Donald Trump. It's just, do you not know who he's running against? This attack on him for this is not going to work. And Donald Trump has a great chance to peel off black voters for the same reason he's peeling off all other kinds of working class Americans. Inflation, cost of living, food prices. Black voters have the same problems that Hispanic voters have, that white voters have. And they think Joe Biden has failed them when it comes to just living day to day in this country. And I think the attitude of the Democratic Party and of Joe Biden specifically has always been to black voters, I just need you to shut up and show up. And Donald Trump says, I want to have a conversation with you, and that's a different attitude. I think that it's interesting to hear Obama describe it this way. Since Donald Trump was convicted, the probability of him becoming the next president has only gone up. You look at the major forecasters, he's now favored to win the presidency. There are credible polls in Virginia and Minnesota showing those states that are now swing states. You can tell which of these campaigns is on offense, and the other one that's not is flailing. One week you've got Joe Biden saying, executive order, close the border. Next week, executive order, amnesty for everybody who's here. They do not know what to do because everything they are trying to do tends to make Donald Trump more popular. I mean, they're going to remember him shuffling out. They're going to remember him staring blankly into the camera. They're going to remember him looking down, losing his train of thought. And they're going to remember that everything I thought I knew, but the White House told me don't believe my own eyes, is actually true.
But that's
Joe Biden, after cannonballing into an empty swimming pool on Thursday night, came out tonight and spoke for 4 minutes off of a teleprompter. He's good for 4 minutes today, as long as somebody else wrote it. After having this completely tone-deaf sort of announcement coming out of this meeting that you wrote about with his family this weekend, where his son, the notorious influence peddler and crack addict, Hunter Biden, says, you got to keep going. Except one thing, they don't have a messaging problem. They have a candidate problem. And most Democrats seem to know that. The only people that don't know it are the Biden family. You got Jill Biden on the cover of Vogue. You got Hunter Biden now running White House senior staff meetings, apparently. I mean, it seems to me you're going to have to drag these people out of the White House by the fingernails, Julie. I'm sorry to tell you. Once again, behind closed doors, Joe Biden rides unicycles and juggles knives. I mean, he looks real good behind closed doors. Let me tell you, that's what we've been hearing for 3.5 years. These governors are now participants in the biggest cover-up in American political history. The condition of Joe Biden has been hidden from us for 3.5 years. Now these governors are complicit in it. We all saw with our own eyes Thursday night. We don't need governors to tell us behind closed doors he's fine. Pollster source friend of mine who's doing some testing among black and Hispanic voters in the wake of the assassination attempt. And I'll just tell you what they said. Minority men, especially middle-aged and young minority men, are enthralled with how Trump responded to the assassination attempt. These are not overtly political people, but it's obvious the story transcends politics in their minds, and it's all about strength and courage under fire. Put another way, the testosterone is flowing. Well, Adam was obviously a surrogate for President Biden before he dropped out of the race. I've always wondered, people who've attacked Donald Trump for getting out of his military service have explained Joe Biden getting out of his. I mean, he didn't really exactly cover himself in glory on this.
That has
point
nothing. That's insane.
No, it's not. It's not insane. You're attacking Trump for getting out of military service. Joe Biden somehow got out of military. I'm just wondering how you square your support for Biden, but yet you attack Trump on this point.
Yeah, okay, good one. Good one, Scott. I mean, Donald Trump is making
you have no answer. You have no
his
answer.
own personal Vietnam.
Nobody tonight said a damn thing. They want you to vote for a ticket based on absolutely no concrete idea about what they would do once they get in office. You said he got more progressive when he got elected governor. So you're saying every time he gets another office, he gets more and more progressive. I think that's exactly what would happen. Tonight, you did hear people say, well, we may not agree with them on everything, but at least it'll be joyful as they tax us into oblivion. Or any other policy, you're asking Republicans to turn over the government to absolute radical liberals over one day, and I'm not prepared to do it because I don't begrudge your viewpoint, but you cannot begrudge a Republican for wondering, hey, maybe it's not a great idea for us to drive off the left side of the road so far we can never find our way back. The reality is she hasn't answered a single hard question, and now they finally signed up for some, and she's got to bring along an emotional support animal at the same time. What? Organic. This is the literal most manufactured presidential campaign ever. She didn't even run. The way Biden and Harris have treated these families and ignored them and disrespected them after one of the most disastrous decisions that they made in this White House, to me, is the most despicable part of this. So you think it's Trump's fault that he got shot? Or
He just said that's what he wants to be thought.
Thank you. Scott, I won't step in that trap.
I guess I'm going to be the only one out here that's not going to blame Donald Trump for his two near assassinations.
No.
I mean, honestly,
it's not about.
He's the one being shot at. He's a target. He's not safe. He can't even walk outside of his own house. Well, just to answer David's question, I mean, I think you get a little credibility on this when you get shot at once, come within a millimeter of dying live on national television, and then have somebody waiting for you at your golf course to try a second time. So I think you get a little credibility when talking about this. I think it's every politician's responsibility to ratchet down this rhetoric. And I do think it's interesting when something like this happens to Trump, immediately most people in American politics want to blame Trump, jump to Trump, and try to get him to own everything. Well, so you can't change the rules in the fourth quarter, but you can change the candidate. Look, Democrats have been trying to change the rules all year. They try to get Trump thrown off the ballot earlier this year. That didn't work. Then they changed out their candidate well past the point he had already won the primary. I mean, look, both parties are constantly scraping and clawing for an advantage. I don't particularly care what they do in Nebraska. It doesn't sound like it's going to happen to me. But why is it offensive for one party to try to get an advantage while the other party's been trying to do the same thing all year?
Can I debunk?
In our own CNN poll today, 51% of Americans said they judged Trump's term to be a success, and only 37% have judged the Biden-Harris administration to be a success. There are a lot of women voters who remember quite fondly the Trump economy. My advice to him would be, remind them, food prices were lower, cost of living was lower, you didn't have the same amount of economic anxiety, and you're often the person in the household that's in the most direct contact, daily contact with the economy. I think the Trump campaign line today ought to be, arsonist returns to scene of crime. I mean, look at the last 3.5 years. We've got the border has effectively been open, people flowing across. ICE today released information that there are 13,000 non-citizens convicted of homicide and almost 16,000 non-citizens convicted of some kind of sexual crime. Okay, so everybody seems to be worried about J.D. Vance and dishonesty, or Donald Trump and dishonesty. I never hear the same concern about Harris and the lies that she tells about Trump, or in Walz himself, who gave the most disastrous response to a question about his own dishonesty about being in Tiananmen Square that I've ever heard in a debate. And you heard it. He's obsessed with the genetic composition of the murderers and the violent people who are in the country. We do have 13,000 murderers here. We have even more people here who've committed sexual crimes, violent sexual crimes. Well, I think the people who care about January the 6th the most have already made up their minds, number one. Number two, I think Democratic Party elites like Obama and like others have been viciously attacking Donald Trump since 2016. And everything they've said about him is what they have always said about him. And I don't think it's particularly effective right now. I think just to be lectured by Democrats about you have to have mental acuity to be the president of the United States after what we just lived through for the last 4 years. Come on, don't lecture me about mental acuity in the presidency.
Trump made it in.
When Democrats, or who all, you included, who all assured us that Joe Biden was riding unicycles and juggling knives in the Oval Office, when we know that wasn't true, and Harris was the chief cheerleader for that whole, the lectures about the mental acuity. Come on. I think a couple things. Number one, if I were Harris, I wouldn't be leaning too heavily into who's hiding what kind of medical conditions of people who are or want to be the president, given her role in lying about the condition of Joe Biden for the last 4 years. That's number one. Kind of funny to me to hear Maria say that Trump's not the same person he was in 2020 when Kamala Harris has literally changed every position she ever took in 2019. You tell me who's the same candidate and who isn't. I have a disagreement on the position of strength. I don't think it's very strong to schedule a 30-minute interview, show up late, do a few minutes, and then have your staff off camera frantically waving their arms trying to get Brett Baer to end the interview. That's equivalent in boxing to throwing the towel in. The fact is, Donald Trump's retrospective job approval is much higher than the job approval of the Biden-Harris administration. The scolding from Kamala Harris, who's upset because her opponent has a sense of humor. This is what we're in for the next 4 years. I agree with her, by the way. Words do have meaning. Everybody's words except for hers, because what she said when she ran for president before apparently have no meaning based on the kind of campaign she's running now. But there's something authentic about the way he does it. There is not a single authentic bone in her body. When people listen to her try to answer these questions, there's nothing. She is searching. You can hear the gears grinding, and it comes through on the television.
A liar is not authentic.
You know, what's a mistake you've made? Nothing. What's a weakness you have? Nothing. What's the first law you want to pass? Nothing. What's a policy difference between you and Joe Biden? Nothing. Over and over and over. Empty, empty, empty. If she were an animal, she'd be a duck-billed platitude. And you're probably going to surprise you. I'm just loving Joe Biden more and more by the week. He's popped out here in October, and every time he says something out loud, it helps Donald Trump or confirms something that Donald Trump says. And he pops out the other day and says, well, she helped me pass all the laws. She's been here side by side for everything we've done. Then he comes out with this thing and confirms the thesis of Donald Trump's entire complaint, which is this is a political prosecution of me. They're trying to the weaponization of the justice. And then here comes my new favorite president, Joe Biden, at the 11th hour to confirm all this. He has been the biggest help to Trump in the last few weeks. It must be driving Harris crazy every time he pops out. A good question.
Anyway,
and I'll tell you where Republicans get tripped up on.
Running mate called them Nazis.
Because in 2020, Joe Biden told us the same thing. He's going to restore the soul of the nation. And we're more divided now than we have ever been. He told us he was going to be a moderate. He's been anything but. And everybody in the Democratic Party told us he was in his right mind. And that turned out to be a lie, too. So you'll have to forgive Republicans for being a little skeptical of these ideas of unity and we're all going to come together when that's what we were told 4 years ago and we got none of it. The political reality is when they made that decision and everyone realized, oh, my gosh, these aren't the competent adults that we were promised.
Donald Trump does.
And then when you pile on top of it the decisions that made inflation worse, it was a compounding interest of political crap over time that they could never get out of. And that's how she lost the race.
There was
I can read a chart and I can read a poll. I guess you can't. But the reality is when he made that decision.
Your petty insults are so weak, dude. You have no idea. Like, I don't even understand if you hear yourself talking. Look, you can laugh all you want, but like, I can't read a chart. Like, it's just so hacky. It's so uninteresting.
Look, the reason that we brought this.
And I think the only group that Harris increased support for over Biden in 2020 was people who make more than $100,000 a year.
Just putting the people
Not at all.
Does anyone have confidence in the current leadership of the Pentagon and the way the defense situation has been operating for the last several years? I mean, from the Afghanistan pullout, which was an extreme debacle for which no one was held accountable. I'm amazed. I did not expect Hitler to get so many meeting requests. First from Joe Biden, now from Mika and Joe. It's amazing that literal Hitler is getting all these meeting requests. And what it tells me, Professor, is that all the rhetoric that came from the left, from the Democrats, from the White House, from Kamala Harris and everyone else before the election, all of the rhetoric, the fascism, the Hitler, the Nazi rally, it was all a bunch of BS. They didn't mean any of it. And if I were in the Democrat sort of rabble's shoes, I would be looking at all my leaders and going, did you just BS me for an entire 6 weeks before the election? I also think there's something to be said for the marketplace here. I mean, who do you think's at an NFL stadium? Who do you think's at the MMA fight? Probably a lot of Trump. Probably a lot of.
Exactly. One's a lot more diverse than the other one, but they're different demographics.
Probably a lot of Trump people. You know, the attempt to put walls on the ticket, and that was going to somehow solve all of the problems that had been built up for years, was ridiculous because it turns out Walz was the last person that men wanted to hear from. And I remember at the beginning of that whole campaign when they put him on, I sat right here and people were like, oh, they got camouflaged hats. They're going to be wearing them in the deer stands this fall. And I think to your point that you just made, that was not that idea that was not formulated by a bunch of dudes who actually go deer hunting. It was come up with by a bunch of people who've never met a dude that actually goes deer hunting. But when you try to put that kind of window dressing on a real communications problem or a real relationship problem, it gets exposed immediately. I agree with Jim. I think that Biden has kind of already politically pardoned Trump. He invited him to the White House and had a happy meeting. He's going to his inauguration. I mean, this is just a few weeks after the entire Democratic Party telling us there's never going to be any more elections. We're not going to have the Constitution anymore. There's going to be a bloodbath, et cetera, et cetera. So politically, he's already effectively absolved Donald Trump of all the accusations that he personally made against him. This is an unnecessary action.
Well, then let me move to
it.
something.
The real thing that separates them, though, is authenticity. People hear Trump and they don't think somebody handed him a script to read. People hear Harris and they say not only they hand her a script, but she can't even do it that well. Oh, Trump. He was the through line for the whole year. Whether we were talking about Biden or then Harris or the campaign at any time, or even now, since the campaign is over, you've got athletes from all over the world doing his famous dance. Donald Trump was the through line for our entire year. His people feel like they were vindicated. The other half of the country feels demoralized, but he's ubiquitous in our politics and our culture. I have one question for Karen, and that is, why did he need an 11-year blanket pardon going back to 2014 when Joe Biden was the vice president? We are sitting on the biggest cover-up of who knows what crimes, and Joe Biden amazingly knows exactly, roughly, when it started. He knows just about when it all started. He's leaving office in complete and total disgrace. He is a liar, and there is no other way to spin this today. This has nothing to do with Trump and everything to do with the character of Joe Biden. To sit for a year and say, I will not do this, I will not do this. The rule of law is sacred. We have to respect the justice system. Juries, we have to respect juries. We have to respect the guardrails and the norms of our democracy. These people are liars. Inflation is transitory. Afghanistan, it's a success. The border is secure. Robert Hur is a liar. The videos are cheap fakes. Biden has a cold. He'll never drop out. Oh, I'll never pardon Hunter. It's all a lie. It is all a grift. Every American, except the most partisan, brain-rotted people, are going to be outraged by this today. He is going to leave off. You think 39% job approval is bad? Just you wait. Just you wait. He's disgraced today. Outrageous.
You don't need to, but Scott, you don't need to hurl names and say people like me are brain rotted. Come on, that's a little beyond the pale, even for you, Scott.
And it's a lie to benefit his own family, and that's all that it is. And everybody who went on TV and said, oh, look how he's the modern George Washington, he's drained every ounce of credibility from every surrogate. If Karine Jean-Pierre had an ounce of self-respect, she'd get off the plane in Africa today, where they're going, so he can avoid the press and resign. He's drained all of her credibility, and everybody else who's defended this, it's draining. NBC News reported that the president and his top aides met this summer and decided two things: that they were going to keep this option open, but they were going to publicly maintain that they would not pardon Hunter Biden through statements from Joe Biden and statements from the White House press secretary. They had a meeting. They coordinated the lie, I guess for political purposes. And now that he's leaving office, he is going back on what he told the American people. This isn't simply changing your mind. This is just fulfilling what you always intended to do. No Republican is shocked that he is doing this. What I am shocked at is the duplicity of the President of the United States and his top aides to come together and form this lie and stick to it this entire time. We all knew it was ridiculous, and now the American people are seeing what a disgrace he really is. The House Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic released its final report today, and the findings would have gotten you canceled a mere 3 years ago had you suggested them then. Things like the NIH did fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, and there was widespread cover-up of the origins. Most likely, the report says, a leak from the Wuhan lab. Do you think they should release this manifesto?
Oh, yeah, I don't mind.
Because some of the other shootings we've had in this country and other places, we still don't know anything about the person who shot at Trump. We still don't know much about the person who committed that atrocity at the Christian school in Nashville. There's a lot of shootings.
The Las Vegas mass shooting we know nothing about.
There's a lot of things we are hidden from us. Things that the report has brought to light that Republicans have felt like they were misled on over the last few years, what they've had questions about who was there and what was going on there. For instance, Chuck Grassley in the Senate pointed out that 4 of the confidential human sources went into the Capitol but weren't prosecuted. Now, like 1,400 and something people were prosecuted.
And there was another one
that had their so they're just little nuggets. Yeah, that's what's fueling some of this conversation.
Let me respond to.
And ultimately, what we were told was complete garbage. And if you talked to pollsters at the time, they would have told you this is not real. This methodology is not good anymore. But that's not what people chose to run with because it fit what most people in the press wanted the narrative to be. So he's pushing back on that. I don't, frankly, have a problem with it. And if they capitulate, it's because they don't want to go through the discovery and what that might show. That authenticity. And then what's the first clip we played tonight? Kamala Harris, who popped out and she saw her shadow, so we'll get 4 more years of word salads. If this is the road Democrats want to continue to go down, people who are going to use cliches, pablum, and sort of just word salad answers to really important questions that everyday people have, they will continue to lose. I'm not for age limits because I do think voters, that's something you can easily discern. And people were discerning that when they were turning against Joe Biden. I just have to ask when the accountability is going to come for every single person who sat in front of a television, who held some position of responsibility and lied their rear end off about what they were seeing behind closed doors. People came on television and said, oh, I'm with him all day and he's really engaged and he's doing the job and he's running circles around us and these videos are cheap fakes and on and on and on. Well, they don't need a safety net. We need more mental health institutions. I guess there was a point in this country where we decided that institutionalizing people was stigmatizing, so we stopped doing it. We need mental health institutions. There are going to be people who are going to have mental illness all their life. I have no concerns about Elon Musk. I have been looking at pictures of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden meeting with Chinese political leaders lately that we were told didn't exist. So for all the people who are really upset about Elon Musk having a very successful international business that actually produces things, actually produces vehicles or rockets or whatever they're doing, the Bidens produce nothing, and yet we're also doing business in China. So I don't accept this.
I don't want you to change the subject because it's not really about whether he's a successful business person or not.